It's the Hero Show. Welcome to the Hero Show, everybody. Starring the irrepressible Andrew Bernstein and the redoubtable Robert Begley. I am Andrew Bernstein, and you are indubitably Robert Begley. How you doing this afternoon, Robert?
I am doing great, Andy, and I am thankful to be on the program today talking about this awesome American holiday.
Yes, yes, it is a time to definitely be thankful, and this is a joyous bright spot in American history. Although it was harsh conditions for the Pilgrims.
Yes.
But but we should start
Hmm.
at the briefly at the beginning before we come to the New World, right? The Cape,
Yeah,
because they
let's
don't
set the
teach much
context.
American history. Yeah, set the context because they don't teach much American history in the schools anymore. Indeed, social studies has replaced history generally, and there's very little history. Anyhow, so the Pilgrims
Yeah.
were a sect of English Puritans, right? Felt
Hmm.
persecuted by the Church of England, fled originally
Yeah.
to the Netherlands, which was a land of religious freedom, certainly more so than in England. But they settled
Hmm.
in Leyden for a while. This is early 17th century, early 1600s.
Yes.
Settled in Leyden for a while, but there were few economic opportunities there, and so the leadership decided to pack up and ship out and sail across the pond to the New
Yes.
World, right? And so they negotiated some kind of treaty with the king's emissaries
Hmm.
to get some parcel of land in England's northern North American colonies, not to be confused with Virginia, right? But further
That's
north,
right.
and yeah, the
Hmm.
Pilgrims you went back to England, and they saddled up, or they famously. Uh, I think they had two ships originally to cross the pond, but one of them was turned out unseaworthy, and
Mayflower.
so they crossed in the
Hmm.
Mayflower. Yeah, the in that one ship,
Hmm.
and so landing in what today is Massachusetts, in and around the Plymouth area in
Yes.
1620. And
That's
I
right.
my just
We
to
knew
be
these
clear
dates
here.
as kids, Andy, right? We
Yeah,
knew these dates
yes,
inside out as kids. 1620
yeah,
Plymouth Rock,
yeah.
and
They taught
66
they taught
days it took to cross the Atlantic, and
right.
a lot of hardship, as you said. A lot of
Oh
people were
yeah,
buried on the way, had to be given overboard. The risk that they took was so high, but that's how much they valued freedom, or just wanted to get away from the oppression that took place in the old world. So,
yeah. The,
uh,
the
so
the old
yeah,
world.
1620 they land.
Right. And the old world, Europe at that time was still suffering from the Protestant Catholic wars, the 16th and 17th
Yes.
centuries, and it was those religious wars were brutal. The Netherlands
Mhm.
was a bright spot of religious freedom, but much of Europe was torn by religious conflict. Yeah, the quest for freedom, the quest for religious freedom drove them. Uh, I checked out, my Massachusetts geography wasn't great, so I looked at the map last night, and I
Mhm.
noticed that Plymouth is further south than where Boston is today. Where the
Yeah.
Puritans settled, the Massachusetts Bay Colony. What year was Massachusetts Bay Colony settled? Do you remember? Because
N-
the
Not before
the,
then.
the
I thought everything was 1620. Like that, I thought that was
okay,
the initial. 1607 was Jamestown in
right,
Virginia,
right.
was
That's
with
right, right,
John Smith, who's going to get a
right.
hero
And
show down the road
Pocahontas,
himself.
and
Yes, and
Pocahontas got to get
Pocahontas.
mentioned on here.
Yeah,
Not
that's right. And
Elizabeth
John Blow.
Warren, not Elizabeth Warren, the real Pocahontas, right?
so but yeah, 1620 was Plymouth, and then I'm almost certain they established Massachusetts as the
Right up
colony,
the road,
Massachusetts
right?
colony.
Yeah, right up the road today.
Yes.
Right up the road from
Hmm.
Plymouth. Back in the 17th century, you probably,
Yeah.
it was probably wilderness. You probably to get from Boston to Plymouth, you probably had to go by ship. But anyhow,
Hmm.
so yeah, Plymouth is further south of Massachusetts, is closer to the Cape, right? To Cape Cod.
Cape Cod.
So
Yep.
just to set,
Mhm.
yeah, just to settle the geography. And that first winter from of 1620 to 1621 was a brutally cold winter. And from what I've
Yeah.
read, exactly half of the Puritans
Yes.
died. I'm not of the Pilgrims died in that
Hmm.
first year. They came with 102 settlers and 51 died.
Yeah.
In that first year, the very cold winter. We should mention, Robert, 17th century. This is during what historians refer to as the Little Ice Age. That was one of
Right.
the Earth's
That's right.
cooler
Hmm.
periods between the medieval warm period and what today is called the modern warm period. And it's just one example that
Hmm.
shows us that the colder climates, the global warming issue fascinates me. And I've done a lot of research on it, published 2 essays on it, and it turns out the colder climates are more dangerous than the warmer climates for all forms of
Hmm.
life, including human life. Anyhow, that was a very harsh winter. They lost literally half their population, and of
Yeah.
course, they brought seeds from England, but this was different terrain, and the
Yes.
seeds that flourished in England were not doing so well in what
Hmm.
they became to be called New England, and but they had some friends that helped them out, didn't they?
Yes, they did.
I don't know how to
The
pronounce the Indian.
Wampanoag.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm
Wampanoag
taking a guess
Indians.
here. Yeah, if we
Yeah,
go phonetically,
yeah, it's
that's
Wampanoag.
they were
Right,
there, and they, to our knowledge, history back then, it's really hard to be certain about these kinds of things, especially when new data comes in and new data is skewed. But yeah, they helped out the natives and taught them how to plant, whether it was corn or other crops, uh, for the long haul, to stay and
right,
to settle. And
right,
so the following
right.
year, they saw the fruits of that labor, sower harvest. So 1621, November, I think December 4th was the first actual, if we pin a date to it, they had the harvest and decided to give a celebration of thanks to God. They were very religious. There was definitely no question about who they were thanking primarily
Yes,
at
yes,
this
yeah.
time. And this is the first, certainly in North America, and the longest lasting continuous. Thanksgiving could have existed in ancient times, but it didn't continue. So it's amazing because it's 400 years. This year would be the anniversary of the first one,
That's right. That's right.
1621. So
And just consider how lucky were the Pilgrims that the Wampanoag Indians were peaceful, agricultural,
yeah,
friendly. I
yeah,
mean, because a lot of the tribes were warriors and had warred with each other
yes,
for going back probably for centuries, probably millennia. Uh, but
hmm,
this tribe, the Wampanoag, and their chief Massasoit. I don't know if that's the proper
hmm,
pronunciation, but I'm sounding it out phonetically. Massasoit or Massasoit uh, was friendly towards the Pilgrims, and like you said, they taught the Pilgrims how to what crops to plant that could flourish in this
hmm,
different terrain and climate that maybe that is probably different than across the pond, and they invited Massasoit and his family to this first thanks to God, and
hmm,
I don't know if he misunderstood but he came with 90 of his guys, uh, but which would have wiped out the Pilgrim supply of food. But the Indians
yeah,
brought a lot of food with them, venison and
yes,
and wild turkey and fish and vegetables and stuff, and they had themselves a feast. And it's an encouraging story because there's so much racism in the world, so much warfare in the world.
hmm,
It's an encouraging story about how these two different peoples, different races, the obviously the Pilgrims were white and the Indians are Asian, originally of Mongolian ancestry, uh,
hmm.
and different cultures, completely different cultures. And I wonder what language they communicated with each other. Did the Pilgrims learn how to speak the Wampanoag language? Did the Indians learn how to speak
No,
English?
a few of the natives did know English. Um, Whether they came
How
up,
did they learn English?
yeah, whether they came up from Virginia or even
Well, the English
um,
had settled in New York by that time, right? When did no Henry Hudson had explored the
no, that
Hudson
was
River, but when did the English settled New York a little bit later, didn't they? I'm trying to
yeah.
remember
Actually, the
the
Dutch
date.
first. Dutch first in New York,
Yeah, what
New
am I saying? Yeah,
Amsterdam.
of course, the Dutch, New
Yeah.
Amsterdam, right? Of course,
Hmm.
the Dutch had settled
Yeah. Like,
New Amsterdam
hmm.
in the 17th century. Correct. So I don't know where did these Indians learn to speak English? Did they go to finishing school across the pond and then went to Oxford and Cambridge?
Exactly. That's right.
I don't. And by
To
the
be
way, this is a great.
determined, but they did.
Yeah, yeah, this is
They
a
did
great
find
painting. Yeah, well, I mean, people who are peaceful and who are friendly towards each
know
other,
how
they
to
could learn
communicate,
each
learn
other's
how to
language. Yeah,
communicate. Yeah.
they learn
Hmm.
how to each other's language. And by the way, if Thanksgiving was in December in what's currently Massachusetts, some of these guys are underdressed, because
I
it's a
think
little
so.
bit
Yeah.
chilly in
Yeah.
Massachusetts in uh,
Yeah.
December. But anyway, this
Hmm.
is a great painting. Shows the
And it
peacefulness
lasted
of these
3 days, Andy. It wasn't
That's
just
right.
like
That's
one meal. It,
they were
it actually
they were
lasted three
they
days,
yeah
and it was like
they
a
were real
festival. Mhm.
Americans. They're real Americans. They just ate for 3 days. But
And
it's a
Brad,
great
well, let's
painting.
talk about William Bradford. The yeah, it is a
Yeah,
great painting. Well, so William Bradford is the governor,
right.
and he's the one that kind of organized it. And he was definitely, fundamentalist, religious, but he saw that he had this vision of, he wanted to settle, and he had ideas about the difference between social and what we call private property, and separating those out. So you want to talk about that?
Yeah, yeah. There's a good article by Lawrence Reed, who's an economist and the former head of
Mhm.
FEE,
Yeah.
Foundation of
Hmm.
Economic Education, on this. And yeah, the original Plymouth colony was communal. I don't want to call it communist because today communist means Marxist. They're definitely not Marxist. They're Christians, but this is a Christian communalism, and
Hmm.
the land was held in common. Crops were brought to a common storehouse and distributed equally. And for
Hmm.
2 years, this went on for 2 years. Everyone was working for the community. And we have William Bradford, like you're right, Robert, he was the first governor of the Plymouth colony. We have his diary. And he says, in
Hmm.
effect, that everyone was happy to claim their equal share of production, but the production shrank. And what a surprise! I don't know what terminology he used, but Larry Reed's terminology in his essay at FEE on this was that the slackers showed up late in the fields and the hard workers resented. And so, finally, Bradford as the governor, changed their economic policy. He divided the
Hmm.
common property into private plots of land. The new owners, they divided that up amongst the people. And you owned, this was your land, and the new owners could produce what they wanted on it, and then they could either keep the product of their labor, or they could trade it freely with other pilgrims, or presumably with the Indians. Um, and
Hmm.
so the economic productivity in the Plymouth colony started to rise. And it's just
Yeah.
it's one of many many stories out of history in different places all over the world that shows communal ownership is a failure, certainly relative to private property. Productivity rises with private property. People have their own
Hmm.
land; they're responsible for it. If they grow food, on it. They and their family could eat well. They can't sponge off the people who aren't as hard workers, can't sponge off the people who are hard workers. And then, and then
Hmm.
private property is a great economic incentive to productivity. Now this happened after the first Thanksgiving, 1621. But I think it's worth mentioning that the Pilgrims did a religious version of communalism. Didn't work. and when they changed their economic policy to private property, they became even more productive.
Yeah, that's a thanks, Andy. That's a good story. Also, close to the first time. If we know, well, I know Virginian history a little bit, but so 1607 is when
That's Jamestown.
Jamestown was established, and by 1619 they have a House of Burgesses and tobacco. There, they find the value of tobacco, which is a big part of Virginia's policy there. But in New England, they didn't have the natural resources, the heat and the um, uh, it was just harder to farm. Even centuries
Yeah.
later, John Adams, the difference between Adams and like Jefferson as farmers, they were just really, really different here. So
Well, New England
introducing
is
private
cold,
property,
Robert. New England
it's
is cold,
New England is
even
cold,
by my
but
standards. Even by my standards, and I like the weather cool.
you're
It's
right. You like the
cold.
cold more than me. But
Yeah.
guess what? Give people freedom and they will find ways to work around that cold. It's funny when I was a kid and when we lived in New York and our house was really cold, I complained to my mother and she'd say, "You're not working fast enough." So, and the point there was you got to move and so give the
Right.
incentive to private property, and now all of a sudden there's going to be progress, and that's probably, Andy, that's if not the first, it's one of the first examples of that in the New World. Okay, because when the Spanish and the
Right.
Portuguese came over, it was just plunder. It was not for the sake of settling and establishing private property rights. Okay, I mean, John Locke is not yet even he's starting to write his in the Netherlands
He's not even
later
alive.
on. And
He's
yeah,
not even Locke's not
okay,
even alive in 1620. His dates are
that's kind.
1632 to 1704. So yeah,
Okay,
Locke's coming
so
in,
Andy,
in the future.
But
Yeah.
here's a point. It's almost as if practice precedes theory in the sense that come over to the New World, don't plunder everything the way the Spanish and Portuguese have done, settle, and then come up with some type of system that rewards incentives, which is what private property does.
Right.
And so this is one reason the New World is different. Not only the New World, but North America is different from Central and South America in the sense that you don't just come plunder and run back with gold back to Europe. And
Yeah. Thank God
at
it
this
was settled
time,
by. Go ahead.
yes, but by Northern Europeans, primarily the British and then the Dutch as well.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that's what I was going to say. Thank God North America was settled largely by the British, not the not the
Yeah,
Spanish or Portuguese. Not that I want to slam the Spanish or
yeah,
Portuguese, but in this week because Henry the Navigator and Vasco da Gama and all these guys who were going to get a hero show did a lot of great things. Uh, and
yeah,
Columbus was sailing for the Spanish crown, right? So so they did a lot of great things, including other elements of their of their culture. But the British, the British, had much better. You're right, much better motives here. There's two things that I think are really
hmm,
important about Plymouth Colony. One is religious freedom, and two is private property. And you see,
yeah.
two
That's
seeds
right.
of what's going to become America at her best. You know,
Yes,
a century and
yes,
a half or two centuries later. I mean, religious freedom
yeah,
that the Pilgrims fled the old world for. I mean, James Madison writes that right into the First Amendment, of the
that's
U.S.
right.
Constitution.
Hmm,
Congress shall
hmm,
make no laws respecting an establishment of religion or restricting the
yeah,
free exercise thereof. Well, I mean, that's at its implicit in the Pilgrims' flight from the old world, and then private property becomes that's the basis of a capitalist system. So the
hmm,
two really important seeds of American culture are planted. Use that farming
right.
terminology; it's appropriate. Are
Yeah,
planted right
yeah,
here in the 1620s in the Plymouth Colony.
yeah. Again, great point. And the other thing to give the British, and again, I include the Dutch too because they were what was known as the middle colonies, which is New York and Pennsylvania. in New Jersey that the Dutch settled. But imagine if they came over and found gold, like easy money, the way the Spanish and
Right.
Portuguese did. They didn't find gold, so they actually had to work. They had to use their mind, and they had to find means of producing a harvest, which is essential to to living. Where again, half the people on the Mayflower die, and it's malnutrition is the it's starvation that is the
Yeah,
primary
sure,
cause of
sure.
death at that time. Hmm.
It's hard.
Okay,
It's harder to grow crops in colder climates than it is in warmer climates.
exactly,
And that this
exactly.
is
Yeah,
why
yeah,
the colder periods of Earth's history, have been more lethal to human life and plant life. Plant life.
yeah.
The foundation of the food chain does not flourish in cold weather. Much as I
Hmm.
dislike hot, humid weather, plants like it.
Hmm.
Plants, you and the plants agree on this, Robert. They flourish in hot, in humid weather.
Preheat.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah, yeah.
Uh-huh.
But anyhow, before we move on to
Mhm.
later points in American history that became and to see how Thanksgiving became a national holiday, I just want to point out Edward Winslow, one of the pilgrims,
Yes,
was one of the,
that's
one
right.
of the two pilgrims who kept a written account of this first feast, that they had,
Hmm.
thanking God for finally we're able the Indians taught us how to grow crops. We grow enough food. We're not going to
Hmm.
starve now, and they're very religious. They thank God for this. And
Hmm.
Winslow wrote a written account of that first feast, and he says, it was the thing that struck me when I was reading about it, because they were eating wild turkeys. These are not fat
Yes,
American turkeys today, made plump on a
right.
farm, for
Hmm.
for the holiday. And Winslow described them, quote, as a toothsome bird, unquote. They were lean and mean and evidently toothy. There's probably not a lot of
Hmm.
meat on
Right.
those wild turkeys, but
Hmm.
when you've lost half your population in a year, largely to starvation, the toothsome
Yeah.
birds is a treat. There's a
Hmm.
so I just wanted to throw that in there. The turkeys that we're gonna eat tomorrow are gonna be a lot meatier than
Yes.
I think the ones the pilgrims and their Indian friends dined on.
Yeah. And also
So
the natives killed 5 deer and brought that to the feast. That
yeah,
was
brought the venison.
another
Yeah,
right. That's a way that they are peacefully coexisting, to use a
yeah,
modern
yeah,
term. And so it's not as if they're coming and taking, coming in empty-handed and saying, where's the
no,
food? They're killing 5 deer, which is going to feed a lot of people. That's why
yeah. That's
that's
a
why the
lot of a
celebration
lot of
lasted the weekend. Yeah.
right, a lot of venison, that the
Hmm.
Indians brought, the Wampanoag Indians, venison,
Hmm.
uh, wild turkey. Experts today, at least from what I was reading, uh, think that there's probably fish there, which makes sense. You're right on the
Yeah.
ocean there, and if
That's
crops
right.
are hard
Yeah.
to grow, then you would you're close to Cape
Hmm.
Cod, so you can
Yeah.
imagine that probably Cape Cod was named so for a reason, right? There were a lot of
That's
cod
right.
in the sea at that time, so
Uh-huh.
most likely
Mhm.
most likely fish, and the Indians brought vegetables too. So yeah, the Indians contributed, or in the modern politically correct terminology, the Native Americans contributed fulsomely
Yeah.
to this feast.
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
Anything else to say about the holiday, about this, the Pilgrims themselves,
Yeah, I
before we
think,
move on to how this
over the
became a big
next,
holiday?
right. Oh, so it continued, in that part. It was more of a northern, northeastern Massachusetts, localized to Massachusetts throughout the next 150 years until the birth of America. Americans win the Revolutionary War, declare independence, and in 1789, George Washington has a proclamation. He's now the president, and it's called the Proclamation by the President. And he says, "Now therefore I do recommend and assign Thursday, the 26th of November, next to be devoted to the people of these states to the service of that great and glorious being who is the beneficent author of all the good that was, that is, or that will be. So similarly, they're giving religion is tied to this holiday from its inception, and just the idea of giving thanks to you know to this benevolent being that Washington is a beneficent author. But that is in October 1789. So he's making it official. Washington's making it an official day to celebrate. Now, it doesn't really catch on in the South so much. So it stays north. We go to 1817. New York is the first state to adopt it as an annual holiday. And then 1827, Sarah Joseph Hale, she was an author. Mary Had a Little Lamb was one of the most famous.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, she's the one that wrote that. And she's called the Mother of Thanksgiving. She petitioned to have, for decades, she was petitioning to have this holiday, this annual national holiday. And it wasn't until Lincoln was president, and during the Civil War, he declared in 1863 that the final Thursday of November would be Thanksgiving. So that's the evolution there up until the Civil War, and it just continues on throughout until we get to the 20th century. And when Roosevelt was a president, yeah, so this is Norman Rockwell. Many should know this is the 1919 painting. So we're just coming up on the roaring 20s and the total
Right.
abundance and that America represents. We'll definitely have more to say about that coming up. But it's kind of snowballing as an event. And then in the 1939, Franklin Roosevelt, he wanted to bump it up to the fourth. That's when it became the fourth Thursday, what it is today, fourth Thursday of the month. And this was during the Great Depression, and he wanted to spur on commerce. So it was actually a good idea because we know that Thanksgiving, the holiday season starts Thanksgiving. So if you move it up, you have more time to shop and spend for Christmas. So, but the during that period, they actually referred to it as Franksgiving for Franklin Roosevelt. That's Americans always have something to say about their leaders, right? They always
But
knock them down to their size. You know, I love one of Ayn Rand's articles where she says no American would call somebody hair doctor or doctor. You know, no, he's FDR, and we have Franksgiving. You know, that's his
right.
idea. So that was his idea, and it stayed that way again right up to the present. So as a holiday, turkey. I don't know the official. You know, I remember Ben Franklin. If we go to Franklin wanted America's national bird. You know this, Andy, right? He wanted it to be the turkey. He thought that was more kind of glorious than the eagle. And so I don't know if that had.
I can disagree with Ben Franklin on
Me
that.
too.
You
Me
know,
too. He's a great guy, but he was off on that.
yeah,
He
oh
was
yeah,
off on that one.
yes, yeah. We're fallible beings. Even Ben Franklin, can make an
That's
error.
right.
Who wants
That's
to eat
right.
the national bird? You know,
Right. No way. Absolutely no way. It's too glorious.
yeah.
But so aside from family, what are traditions? What other traditions evolved from this era? 1924 was the first time the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade took place, and I went many times. I used to go every single year, frankly, and it was always
Not in
cold. You know,
1924, presumably, right? Not in 1924,
no,
presumably.
no, you're right. Yeah, I missed a few. I missed a few of them.
Yeah,
That's for sure.
yeah.
But
On account of not
uh,
being born yet, so you could be forgiven. You
yeah,
could be forgiven.
but that's you have marching bands, you have floats, and if you know anything about coming now, Andy, coming to the capitalism motivation, if you know anything about the Thanksgiving Day parades that Macy does, who is the last float? It's always Santa Claus. which is basically saying shop at Macy's. We are
Yeah,
capitalists. We
exactly.
want to trade value for
Exactly.
value, and so again, this is the
Black
20.
Friday's the biggest. Black Friday's the biggest shopping day of the year. So Macy's, this is definitely in
Mhm.
Macy's self-interest. Have the parade, advertise Macy's, have Santa Claus shop for Christmas.
Yeah,
So yeah, self-interest, rational self-interest leads to
right.
a lot of good things. And
Hmm.
the Macy's
Hmm.
parade is Thanksgiving Day parade has become one iconic form of it. It's good
Yeah,
stuff. But by the way, before you continue, let me say something about
yeah.
Norman
Go ahead.
Rockwell real quick,
Mhm.
because
Sure. Yeah.
people don't know Norman Rockwell. An iconic. This is iconic Americana. I mean, I know a
Yes.
lot of aficionados of art. They kind of poo-poo Norman Rockwell. They look down their nose at him. But I love Norman Rockwell.
Me
I
too.
think he's a
Me too.
great artist,
Hmm.
and he's got the American sense of life. He captures so much about what is good, the best of America.
Benevolence.
In American
Benevolence
life, the
jumps
benevolence,
out.
yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, the goodwill of his paintings is just,
Hmm.
it's just, yeah, it's rich, and so this is a good, this is a great time to have, the great Norman Rockwell painting, and
Yes.
the prototypical American painter on the prototypical American holiday. Celebrating
Hmm.
the prototypical American
Yeah,
holiday.
and he
This
has.
is
We
good
could just
stuff.
mention. I'm sorry, Andy. He
Yeah,
also
go.
has another one. This is 1919, and then in 1943, which was the height of the Depression, is the famous one with the family, and the mother has the turkey in the middle, and the father sitting there, and the children are around the table. That's likely more famous. I think it's called "Freedom from Want." So
Was
it
it
has that
was it
kind of
1933?
40,
Because 1943
43.
is in the middle of World War II, though. That's World War II.
Yes,
1943.
yeah,
Okay, okay.
43.
All right. Okay,
Fountainhead. I
43.
never forget that year.
Oh yeah, Fountainhead was published in 43,
That's
correct.
right. Yeah. Whatever else happened in 1943, the Fountainhead was published. That's the way my brain
Well, the Allies
goes.
started making advances against Nazi Germany
Yeah,
and
true.
against Imperial Japan. So it was a bloodbath, but
Hmm.
it had to be fought, and
Yeah.
final victory was assured in both Europe and the Pacific. But anyhow, so back to
But Rockwell, I
to
agree, Andy. I totally agree. He's Americana. You notice his style from any other painter. That's one thing,
yes,
and it's very simple. It's not grandiose the way, but not everything needs to be grandiose. It's like that's his purpose is different from the masters. Okay, his purpose is definitely different, and I don't think anybody's better at doing what he does than him, portraying
yeah,
that benevolent American sense of
yeah,
life.
yeah.
Mhm.
His body of work is Americana. You want the great American novel, you read The Fountainhead. It's about
Yeah.
independence and individualism.
Hmm.
If you want Americana, painted on the canvas, you look at the body of work of Norman Rockwell. This is America at her best.
Hmm.
Enormously benevolent, and people from all over the world wanting to come. Still, you know, with the country, I think in sad decline, is still this great this um what is it, I
Opportunity.
think it was, yeah, the land of opportunity. I was trying to remember that religious city on the hill.
Yeah,
Was
yeah,
one of
on the
yeah,
hill.
was that one of the Puritans? One of the Puritans said, is, the
Hmm.
city on the hill. That's what America became, the shining beacon to people from all over the world. And this is
Hmm.
one of the reasons. One is freedom, and the second one, the economic concomitant, is prosperity. Freedom leads to prosperity.
Yes.
Freedom leads to abundance. People want that for themselves and for their children. And this Norman Rockwell
Hmm.
painting of Thanksgiving really symbolizes that beautifully. Still
Yeah.
a shining city on the hill, even if
That's
I'm
right.
right that the country is in decline, and I don't think the decline is necessarily irreversible. Right? It can be
No,
reversed.
that's
But
right.
anyhow,
That's right.
uh,
And one of the things we're doing here is aiming towards that end.
yeah, the
But
hero
so if we
show,
continue,
right,
that's right.
right,
That's right. It's celebrating them and bringing them to people who don't know American history and the heroism that is so prevalent. But if we go to
Yeah,
another Americana,
I just want to see
uh,
the heroic
yeah,
spirit operating
yes,
under conditions of political economic freedom can achieve prosperity on the really good, like it's not, you're never gonna have a Garden of Eden. In fact, who would want one? You're the ward of God at that point. But you're not gonna have perfection, but you have great prosperity. The heroic spirit operating under conditions of political economic freedom. And that's the real lesson of American history, including Thanksgiving.
yeah, and also if talk about Garden of Eden, if you don't produce what you effectively, if you don't produce what you consume, if it's handed to you, you don't have self-esteem, you don't have pride. Okay, so it's from that. That's kind of, to me, the American spirit. There is that, no, the American, from its inception, from the Puritans, from Jamestown, and on through, so those were British, on through George Washington and 19th century heroes. It's that go get, stick to it, go get them spirit, the can do spirit, that's just so
Yeah,
essential
right.
to the American mindset, and to this day it still continues.
No,
But if we
absolutely right. It's
continue,
just
yeah,
let me make
go
one
ahead.
last point uh,
Yeah,
about Norman Rockwell. It just occurred to me.
sure.
We're gonna have Sandra Shaw back on the show at some point to discuss. That was a great show on the heroism of Greek art. Have
Yeah,
Sandra Shaw back on the show again to, discuss further in her book on art history. And I want to ask her what's her honest judgment of Norman Rockwell, since she's a brilliant art historian, an expert in this field. I want to ask her
yes,
what her honest judgment is of Rockwell's work. It'd be interesting to hear, a rational, very knowledgeable art historian's
yeah.
assessment.
I could tell you with someone else whose opinion I respect is Diane Durante, and she's a big fan.
Oh, sure. Oh,
I
sure. Yeah.
could I could say that for
Yeah.
sure. And
Yes.
yeah, she knows art history as well,
Yeah.
and for the same reasons that we identified, Andy. So,
Right. Okay.
but if we
Yeah. She has
continue
a
with
PhD.
American,
She has a PhD. Diane Durante has a
yeah,
PhD in art history, right? Yeah. So she's certainly an expert in the
right.
field. Okay.
hmm
So
hmm
okay,
No,
let's get back
sure.
to the holiday.
So continuing with American tradition, one of the things that grips me as um, the family side, which I'm fortunate that Thanksgiving families, the whole big meal, but one of the specials is Charlie Brown special on Thanksgiving, which
Yeah.
uh, with which is, yes, with the pumpkin pie. He's got
It's
the Pilgrim's hat
it's the
on, and
great,
it's
yeah, it's the great pumpkin, Charlie Brown.
great
Yeah, that's
pumpkin
good.
patch. Yeah,
Right, that's great
but the
stuff. Right.
Thanksgiving episode, Andy, starts with, it's the classic. Lucy has the football, and Charlie Brown doesn't want to kick it. He's like, "No, I'm not going to kick it. You're going to pull it away from me." And she's like, "No, no, it's Thanksgiving. I promise I won't." And of course, he tries. She pulls it away, and he falls down. So that brings us to another tradition, which is football on Thanksgiving. Started 1876, was Yale versus Princeton. Imagine that. I mean, that's a
Ivy
long
League.
time ago.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, a long time ago that
That's
football
almost
became,
150 years ago.
yeah, yeah. And then in the 20s, 1920s, professional football, Chicago, there were two teams in Chicago, they would play. And then in recent times, the two famous teams that always played, Detroit Lions and Dallas Cowboys. So football is similarly a part
Right.
of the Americana,
Yeah. Too
American
bad.
football,
It's
for those,
too bad the Detroit
for those,
Lions got involved in this, because they are a sorry franchise.
they
But
are.
I
They have one
don't
good
even.
year, like out of every 15, but uh,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So, but yeah, just continuing with this, what makes American, what makes America, and Thanksgiving particularly so American. And of course, nobody said it better than Ayn Rand. There's two references. One is in Atlas Shrugged, when Hank is one of the most brilliant scenes in Atlas Shrugged, because he's there celebrating Thanksgiving with his family, who are, the whole novel, they're at odds with him. And Ayn Rand talks about all the different how much everything cost. You know how beautiful the table looks and the turkey's there, and Reardon's like, well, guess what? I'm the one paid for all this, and they're still hammering him about trying to impose guilt on him. And it's one of the pivotal moments. I don't want to give a spoiler, but Reardon makes a decision, on Thanksgiving night, and then later on he sees Dagny Taggart, and he tells her it's the celebration, the producer's holiday for a successful, productivity there. So tying in the virtue of productivity, as I mentioned earlier, with the Garden of Eden, we don't want we want to go out there and prove we can deal with reality and successfully, and that is by, if we go to the barest level, creating the food that we need, but then as we get more and more advanced, other products and services that enhance human life.
No, absolutely right. Thanksgiving is a producer's holiday. This
Hmm.
is not
Hmm.
reality is not a Garden of Eden. We're
No.
not going to flourish if we don't produce. It's funny because you reminded me a year or so ago. Our good friend Razi Ginsburg, who runs the Ayn Rand Center UK, you had me on.
Hmm.
We would I was debating some English socialist. She was a Marxist, and one of
Hmm.
her claims was that we have to work because of capitalism. And if we didn't have capitalism, we wouldn't have to engage in this rat race of running to our jobs and working long hours and and everything.
Hmm.
And I just made a point, straight objectivism 101, that nature requires us to produce, not society. It's under
Hmm.
any political economic system, we're going to need to grow crops and build houses and learn how to cure diseases and and so on and so forth. It's inherent in the nature of reality. This is why you know
Yeah.
Ayn Rand shows us a human being's primary relationship is not to other people, although relationships with other people are enormously important, but our primary relationship is to reality. We have to produce in order,
Yeah.
one, to survive, and two to flourish. And so, yeah, Thanksgiving
That's right.
is a producer's holiday. And
Hmm.
America has
Hmm.
been par excellence with the development of capitalism, the most productive nation of history, the
Yeah.
wealthiest nation of history, which is, of course, like I said before, is a secondary reason why a lot of immigrants want to come here. I think the primary reason is still freedom, but the consequence of freedom
Hmm.
is you unleash the mind, and the creative abilities of millions of people, and that's how society becomes productive and wealthy. So you want
Yeah.
you you want me to read
Speaking
from Ayn
of
Rand?
immigrants who came here to American
Oh yeah,
to
and
America, to Ayn Rand
from
that's
communism,
right.
no less, fleeing from communism.
Yeah, so this is cashing in on hunger, April 12th, 1974. She says Thanksgiving is a typically American holiday. In spite of its religious form, giving thanks to God for a good harvest. So she's recognizing right there that the
Yeah, the
historical
history,
description,
right?
but she says its essential secular meaning is a celebration of successful production. It is the producer's holiday. The lavish meal is a symbol of the fact that abundant consumption is a result and reward of production. Abundance is America's pride. And that is, you know, Ayn Rand says it. She just knows how to essentialize the greatness of America, taking an American holiday that nobody put it as succinctly and as fundamentally as Ayn Rand. And the first time I read that, I've always been a fan. As I said, I always go to the Macy's Day Parade. I love being with family, but having the philosophical understanding of the significance of it, boom, went right up in my estimation of how important and unique Thanksgiving is as a holiday
Mhm.
and Americans are as a people.
No, I absolutely agree, and Ayn Rand absolutely captured the essence of it. I just wanted to
Yeah.
say one last thing. I'm gonna be right back because I want to give thanks here also. Right back.
Okay. Well, while Andy's coming out, while he's out, I want to say thank you. Who to give thanks to? First of all, Elliot behind the scenes helping us out with the technical production, but Objective Standard Institute for having the Hero Show regularly, for the
Mhm.
donors who support us, because we don't do this stuff for free. It actually costs money. Craig and Sarah Biddle, my co-workers, just a huge thank you to you guys for everything you've done. My dearest Carrie Ann, I always have to thank, and my family. So that's my kind of checklist, Andy, and you can take over from here.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I no, I agree. I have a number of people in my personal life, including my beautiful
Hmm.
daughter, Penelope Joy.
Yes,
I want to give thanks to for being in my life. Thanks to you, being a close friend for almost 40 years now, since we
a
met at
long time,
the
boy. Wow,
New School for Social Research.
I
Of
was like
course,
2 years
of
old
course,
when I met you, right?
yeah, of course on right, that's right. Of course on philosophy of objectivism at the New School for Social Research. But I also want to thank everybody at OSI, from Craig and Sarah to
Yes,
Elliot and Tom and Angel and everybody. But
John.
also, uh, I want to give thanks.
Mm,
My book. I always have a hard time getting this in front of the
yeah.
camera. Uh, my book, The Brooklyn Stories, a rousing collection from New York's most colorful borough, has just been published. So I want to give thanks to me, for writing it,
Yes.
because there's some really
Thank
good
you,
stories.
Andy.
Yeah,
Yes.
thank you. You're welcome. There's some really good stories here.
Yeah.
So I can promote it here. But right after the show,
And
I'm
Brooklyn
going. I'm
too.
going.
Brooklyn deserves thanks for being like no place else on earth, right?
Be in a very unique and colorful place. But I'm going to give
Hmm.
thanks right after the show is over, everybody. I'm going to the post office and I'm mailing a copy of this book to our good friend Carl Barney, who's done so
Oh,
much. Uh, you know,
thank you,
uh,
Carl, for everything you've
yeah,
done. Absolutely.
thank you,
Hmm.
Carl. The Objective Standard Institute, you know, and the Prometheus Foundation,
Prometheus.
the tremendous
Hmm.
productivity of Carl Barney, who earned a fortune,
Yes.
the tremendous benevolence and largesse, in which he uses
Yeah.
a great deal of that money to promote objectivism. So
Hmm.
I'm going to give thanks to Carl, who's been a good friend of mine for a long time and has been enormous. I do think, honestly, I mean, I could be wrong, that third only to Ayn Rand and Leonard Peikoff, I do think that Carl Barney's done more to promote objectivism than anybody else in the world.
I,
And
I would agree. Yeah, I would agree with that, Andy. His
so I
reach has
definitely
been global. Hmm.
right,
And we are
right, and I
thankful
want
to Carl.
yeah,
Yep.
and
Hmm.
he's been under attack by a lot of people for a lot of different reasons, which I consider
Yeah.
spurious. Uh,
Yeah.
and he's done an enormous amount of good, and
Not
I
on
got to
this
give
show. Let's just say that.
yeah,
He
yeah,
won't
right,
be not on
right.
this show. We
No, he
celebrate
won't be
heroes.
attacked on this show.
Hmm.
Right, absolutely right. And so part of my way of giving thanks to Carl is I'm heading to the post office and I'm sending him a copy, of this book. And I think he's gonna enjoy. I'm conceited enough to think he'll
Great.
enjoy some of these stories.
Good.
So thank
Good
you,
job, Andy.
Carl.
Good act
Yeah,
of
yeah,
justice. Hmm.
yeah, yes, yes. So
So
one
happy
last point.
Thanksgiving, everybody. Enjoy your turkey
Yes,
and
yes.
pumpkin pie and all that good stuff, and friends and family and parades and all the good things in life, because
and
that's what we do.
and
We're here to celebrate.
the freedom that we still have, and that we still have freedom of speech. We can still stand up and and speak our mind,
Yes.
in some cases without being canceled, but we have to use our freedom of speech to defend freedom of speech. And
Right.
Thanksgiving is the holiday of productive men and women and of free men and women.
Abundance.
So have a great
Yes.
Thanksgiving, everybody. I want to celebrate what the Pilgrims did.
Hey.
Uh,
Yes.
you, Robert, have a great Thanksgiving, and
Thank you,
we'll
Andy.
be
You too.
back next. Yeah, thank you. We'll
Next
be
week.
back next week on the Hero Show, everybody. So have a heroic day, have a heroic Thanksgiving, and let's try to lead more heroic lives. See you next week, everybody.
Absolutely.